All right, hello, good morning, good evening, and good night. I hope you guys are doing absolutely fantastic because today we're going to be talking about a couple different ETFs. We're going to be talking about YMAX and we're also going to talk about XDTE. The reason is because I've said for a very long time, YMAX, it's one of my main holdings. I currently hold about 748 shares, if you could see on the bottom right here, of YMAX, and I constantly say that YMAX links very closely to the S&P 500. Now, what I want to kind of do a little comparison is I want to compare YMAX to XDTE. I want to compare more of a high yield, less focused on the kind of capital, the underlying capital, the share price, versus which XDTE is more so about smaller dividends and about a stabler NAV. So what I want to talk about is I want to compare the price charts of both YMAX and XDTE. This is a full comparison about YMAX and XDTE, basically going off of their strategies, which they do very similar strategies, both using synthetic covered calls. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about their dividend yields. We're going to talk about the distributions compared, because YMAX, of course, pays higher dividend yields. But look at this, past 6 months, down 11.5%, whereas we have XDTE up 3.85%, but we take a little bit of a hit on the dividend side as they're only paying out 18% dividends. Still fantastic, still awesome. And of course, we're going to compare it to the S&P 500. I want to talk a little bit about the companies in there and how it relates to YMAX and XDTE. So if that does sound good, please do remember to subscribe. We're up to 5,843 subscribers, 390 subscribers in the past 28 days. That is awesome. That is fantastic. Thank you guys very much. And thank you to all who watched that little Zim video. But more on that later. So let's talk a little bit about the S&P 500. So what it can also give you is kind of my thoughts. I do think that we're currently entering into a little bit of a downtrend in the S&P 500. We've hit a little bit of a high point. I think there's a support barrier now at about this $560, $570 level. But if we do kind of trend below there, we might see kind of the S&P 500 go as low, or SPY goes as low as $550, $545. So just something to kind of keep in mind if you're holding on to some cash. I currently have a lot of shares of DLR.TO, which are going to be journaled and then transitioned into cash to buy either YMAX, XDTE. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do yet, but I will decide on that. I'm definitely looking to potentially get a small position in XDTE just to get a little bit of exposure into some kind of roundhill fund, something different. But nonetheless, I do think there's going to be a little bit of a downtrend in SPY coming, so keep some cash handy if you're looking to take advantage. But for the S&P 500, the reason why I have it up here is because we're talking about YMAX and XDTE. Of course, XDTE, S&P 500, zero date to expiry covered call strategy ETF. XDTE utilizes a synthetic covered call strategy that seeks to provide current income on a weekly basis. Now the same thing as YMAX. Both are on a weekly basis, while also providing exposure to the price return of the S&P 500 index. So what they're looking to do is they're basically looking to match the S&P 500 index in terms of price returns. Have they done that? No. In the past 6 months, they're up 3.85%. where the S&P 500 is up 15.96% here. YMAX, on the other hand, is actually down about 11.45%, but it's also been paying about 60% in terms of dividends. So that's something to keep in mind. YMAX, you're getting a lot more income back. XDT, you're getting less income, but you're getting more stabler price returns, even over the kind of whole inception of this fund. But YMAX. Why do I talk about YMAX and why do I compare it to the S&P 500 so much? YMAX is the universe of funds for Yieldmax, basically saying it holds all of the underlying stocks or ETFs that Yieldmax tracks, which are Tesla, TSOY, Apple, Amazon, Google, Netflix. Now I want to show you the S&P 500. These are the 500 companies that make up the S&P. I have all 500 listed here. And they're rated by weighting, as you could see right here. What are the top companies? I wonder, are they as similar as we see in the Yieldmax ETFs for YMAX? We have Apple, boom, YMAX ETF, 7.25%. NVIDIA, 7%. Microsoft, another one. This is already, we're up to 20%. Amazon, cool, 3.5%. Meta, Facebook, Alphabet, Google. So you could see here that a lot of these Yieldmax ETFs are actually the top weighted companies in the S&P 500, which is why I compare YMAX to SPY so much. Now, when we look at this, that's fantastic, because if we have the big market movers, that means YMAX should, for the majority, perform similar to the S&P 500. And that's exactly what we want. We want to track the S&P 500. We want to track the index, because indexes generally give us the best returns. And of course, when we're diversified across a lot of different stocks or ETFs or sectors, the one great thing about YMAX is it doesn't only hold to kind of the S&P 500 stocks. It also goes into other areas like Bitcoin, which is kind of cool, and other different platforms. But that, I think, is really awesome to see that so many of the highest weighted S&P 500 stocks are actually within YMAX. And of course, it's the YMAX ETFs, but it's not just, it's not the individual stocks themselves. Now that we've seen kind of that, of course, XDTE kind of invests in the price returns of the entire S&P 500. So really, when you look at all these companies, you can kind of look at XDTE, and they're invested in the price return of all of these companies in this exact same weighting and form, because they're investing directly into the S&P 500 using a synthetic cover call strategy. Now, okay, they both pay weekly distributions. Where you are going to have to make the decision for yourself is, do you want higher monthly income, which you will then look to reinvest, or do you want a stable income source with a stable NAV, a stable kind of price reaction? And that's really where Roundhill, I think, is doing a fantastic job. They've been able to maintain, and look at this, over the past 6 months, they have maintained, and they've actually grown 3.85% their stock valuation while paying out 18% dividends. And when we look at the dividends being paid out, their last dividend, it's based on their last dividend, 24 cents roughly. This is roughly about the average. You could see they've gone down to 18, 19 cents, but for the majority, they paid higher than 24 cents. You have 33, 31, 26, 38, 38, 41. So you could see here that although they're paying out currently an 18% dividend, it's not always the case. Sometimes, in fact, it's even higher, and they're also creating a stable NAV price and a stable capital return, which is kind of cool. YMAX, it's pretty good for the most part. You have to be very careful when you reinvest. I currently, if we look at my position here, my average cost per share, if it shows, I have a $17.76 position and a $17.72 position. So I'm roughly a little bit down on my YMAX investment, but at the same time, I'm also receiving roughly about $600 in terms of income from, and this is every single month, from roughly a $12,500 investment, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. And of course, all that will only be reinvested to grow even more. And then just looking at kind of a performance basis on a day-to-day, this will be the last kind of thing that we look at. You could see here day-to-day, the S&P 500 is down about 0.69%, YMAX down 0.68%, and then Roundhill down 0.68%. So these two ETFs, they do a fantastic job. These cover call ETFs do a fantastic job at covering the overall market, the overall index, very closely and very tightly, which I think is a great job. And I found even YMAX actually outperforms the S&P 500 on some days. It can't take all days, but some days it does. But I love to see that these ETFs, although, not sure XDTE is directly tied, YMAX is not, but they're following very close to the S&P 500 in terms of price returns and on a day-to-day basis, which is what we need to see. We need to see big income from both of these ETFs, but we also need to see them tie close to the S&P 500. So if you guys enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe. We're up to 5,843 subscribers. I hope you guys enjoyed this little comparison between YMAX and XDTE. Definitely looking to potentially start a position in XDTE. That's why I got a lot of kind of money saved up here. If you guys enjoyed, please do remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.